All right, let me just cue in the next session here, which we have on policy options for increasing shares of renewables in emerging markets. And I'm very pleased that I just mentioned the conference in Berkeley, and actually the closing keynote at UC Berkeley was held then by Professor Dr. Rezwan Khan. Here in Bangladesh, probably most of you know him as the VC, or now former Vice Chancellor of United International University, but also as a fellow at the Bangladesh Academy of Sciences. Very well known. For me, Rezwan, really my recollection is always, this was the person who insisted that we need high quality batteries, which according to me was one of the key success factors that the Solar Home System Program had such a success and has become a global reference, which was, I think, applauded, referenced, recommended here throughout the conference. So I think I cannot overestimate your contribution there. And with that, I'll shut up and hand over the chairing of this session to you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for your kind introduction. We have 3 presentations here today. The basic idea or the theme of this session is policy options for Bangladesh for increasing shares of renewables. So we have got 3 presentations, one from Mohammad Shahidul Alam from North-South University, Shakila Aziz from United International University, and Shahriar Ahmed Chowdhury, also from United International University. So before we start, I will ask everybody to, let them present their paper first, and after that we will have some time to have the discussions. And moderation, who will be moderating it? Sebastian?
It will be all yours, Rezwan. I mean, you okay. Kind of can switch your roles, since you're also an author of the paper. You're most invited to switch roles, but I would leave it completely to you to moderate through as the chair.
So the actual time for presentation will be roughly 10 to 15 minutes, isn't it?
Sorry, I was muted. So yeah, we have 90 minutes, so I think we have ample time. Sharia will not be present, so Shakila will present both papers.
Yes.
Will present both papers. So I think if we can use half the time for paper presentation and half the time for discussion, that would be probably very fruitful.
So I mean, would it be the question answers right after the session, the paper presentation, or that will be
I think we should do that. I think that we should do that so that it's fresh. Yeah, and I will also monitor the Q&A and give you some cues to that from the audience.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for that. So I will start with the first presentation. Shahidul Alam, please give a brief introduction of yourself. I just introduced you as a professor from North-South University. Plus, give a brief introduction, your interest and research interests, and start with the presentations.
Thank you, sir, Dr. Rezwan Ahmed. I am very much pleased to get this chance to present in this international conference. Is my audio coming through all right? Or?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. So the chair of the session knows, but I think a lot of other audiences are here, and also I think it is being broadcasted in the
correct
Facebook and other medias probably, right? So just to give okay, so I should give my introduction first, right? Trained as an engineer, I graduated from Tobit, but I did not continue long as an engineer. I spent some time as an engineer both in Bangladesh and US. I did my bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering, but at some point I decided to change to management science, more business-oriented topics. And I did my PhD from University of Waterloo in management science. And currently I teach at a business school in North-South University. Most of my research topics involve strategy, entrepreneurship, organization related stuff. Now, you might be wondering why I am here presenting about energy, right? One of the main trigger for this particular research was when I saw that we as a nation, Bangladesh is probably a little bit late in the game in the renewable energy, but we have started to move towards renewable energy options, particularly with net metering and other things. So we had started have had a conversation with Professor Rezwan about what should be the next steps. What are the things that we are not actually doing right now? And one thing that came out that is this peaking power plant. The demand for peaking power plant will go up if the net metering option is successful, that we all want, right? So what are the choices that we should that are there to pursue, and that kept us started. I mean, got us started, and at some point, some of the students from a international university got involved as part of their senior project, and they did some research that a part of it will be presented in this paper. With that introduction, let me get the paper started, and I think I would not be presenting all the details of that we have in the presentation, but certainly we can get back to those if there are questions. Let me share my screen first with my presentations. Just a minute. Okay, is it visible now, the share? The slides?
Yes.
Yes,
okay.
yes, it's visible.
Okay, so this is the title: Policy Options While Increasing Share of Renewable Energy. And we want to focus. I will be a little bit general at the beginning, but we want to get our focus on the peaking power plant, right? Technology choices for peaking power plant. And we, Professor Rezwan Khan, and I am presenting, but we have other collaborators, some students collaborators, and also faculty collaborators that I will talk about at the very end of the lectures. So let me first give you the overview of the power sector that we have right now. This shows that a majority part of the power capacity is in the public sector, almost 52%, right? Independent power producers are there, 35%, and some other players. A growing number is imported, right? We are currently importing from India, and there are talks to import from other countries also, including Bhutan and Nepal. So this is the mix is actually getting interesting. Although if you go back a few years, 5-10 years, probably it was only public sector. So there are increasing role of various stakeholders here. Right? What is the technology side? What is the scenario of technology? We currently have gas producing the fuel, right? Fuel contributing to the overall production is more than 50%, 51.7%. Coal is there, 8.3%. This data is not as current. It was collected at January 2021, but I would assume that there would be a lot of lag between the real picture and some of these data. And with a lot of coal coming into the picture, particularly the Matarbari and Paira, this person, I would not be surprised if this percent is a little bit off the real picture. And we have other hydro and solar. You can see the contribution of solar is not that big. It's less than 1%. But also we certainly hope that this 0.4% will change. This figure will change over the years. We are talking about the grid component of the power sector. Of course, there are a lot of off-grid systems that are supplying the houses and other stuff. So if we want to look at the load situation, since we want to get towards the peaking power plant issue that we anticipate to be an important aspect of our energy policies in coming days with this increasing share of renewables. So this is probably a very basic if you are from engineering background, but if you are not from engineering background, from power background, you can see that there is a huge difference of demand changing. Demand is changing with the day of the time, right? During the daytime, it's very, very low, and in the evening, starting at the evening around 6, 7 p.m., it starts going up. Now, if you are producing, if you are managing the grid, producing power to supply to the grid, you have to deal with this change in demand. And from a manager's point of view, the engineers who are in charge of load balancing, this is not a very easy task to do, right? Because they have to shut down some of the power plants if the demand is low. If the power demand is going up, they have to start up those plants. Now, this was already difficult because shutting down and starting up generators is not easy. Now, if you put a lot of renewables into the mix, then this balancing gets too difficult. Why? Because you are no longer in a position to start up or shut down the power sources, right? Renewables have their own mind. They come and go at their own will. So that's where we look at this issue of increasing mix of renewables and how we can have a better control within the picture, right? So just to further elaborate, this is the 3-hour time, which is when we need the most of the peaking powers. This starts around 6 p.m. in the evening and ends at 9 p.m. And at that time, you would expect a lot of power stations firing up in different parts of the country and to start supplying the grid. And after 3 hours, they will be shutting down. Now, if you think about the costing part, these power plants are sitting idle for the rest of the 21 hours unless there is an extraordinary situation. But you already invested money on the capacity of those power plants. So the costing for this peaking power plant is not same as the other power plants that are in the base load. So that's why it gives us some extra, extra mileage, I would say, so that we can actually consider using other technological choices to replace this traditional peaking power plants that we have right now with solar and others. And just to give a further picture about why peaking power is expensive, I already talked about this. This overhead for the peaking power plant is high compared to the natural gas or other traditional traditionally run power plants, which run throughout the day and night because they are in the base load. So if you look at this right graph, HFO has per unit cost of 15.2 Dhaka per unit, which is quite high, right? Compared to if you look at the base load, natural gas source, that's 3.5. So the difference between minimum cost and the maximum cost that the power plants are supplying in the grid is quite high. Now, if you can find some way to replace this maximum cost power plants, of course, you would do that from management point of view. And if you can add some sustainable sources, renewable sources, in doing so, that would be even better, right? We need a mix of technologies into the picture because things are changing. Even if the finance does not support some of those choices, we might want to actually play with those. Why? Because some of the solar choices or other renewable choices was not viable 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years back. So next 5 years, we don't know what is going to happen. So when we started this project, our thinking was that can we explore some of the choices that is viable right now, and thankfully we found one actually, and also consider other options. What are those other choices that might be tried or explored in the context of Bangladesh situation? So with that, this slide all further shows how this solar, if the renewable sources get into the grid, how it is going to increase the imbalance. You see the peaking power, the extra power is needed from 6 p.m., whereas our solar sources are drying up at 5 p.m. Now, it is, we are assuming that the solar is not stored anywhere, right? It is directly fed into the grid. Now, that is what the current policy is with net metering. And I will not go into the details why that it was done, but that is the policy. So if we have solar and that goes into the grid, and so base load or the daytime demand from traditional power sources, power generators will go down. So what will happen, the demand of the peaking power plants will increase if this solar actually are a stable source of power for our grids. Now, it's not presenting a very interesting picture for our grid management, both from policy point of view and also from the financial side. So one of the choices, we looked around the countries, what the other countries are doing, but we found that the storage of energy is an increasing trend, particularly storing of those renewable sources. Because renewables come at their will, but we need them at a different time, right? And also renewables have their own variations that doesn't match with the demand. So if you look at this picture, this graph from 2013 to 2019, a lot of new storage capacity is coming. Korea is very significant there in 2018. They added a lot of storage. China is also increasing during the last 2-3 years. And the other picture here, it shows that what part of that storage is coming from behind the meter, like at the micro level, at the household level. The blue part is showing that a very good portion of that storage energy is coming from that households or industrial installations distributed. Of course, a good part, close to 30–40% of the storage capacity is at the grid scale, which is managed by probably the grid companies or power stations. Now, this blue part that we see at the global level, we don't have a plan for that yet. With net metering and others, we did not anticipate to have those batteries for financial reasons and for other reasons. Now, of course, we have to think about what are the workaround, or are we going to actually live with this without this behind the meter storage? So that we looked at the technologies that are available right now for possible storage. If Bangladesh wanted to go into some of the grid storage, at least, if not the behind the meter storage, and you can see that pumped hydropower is there, which is a possible option for us. Compressed air energy, flywheels, thermal salts, and lithium-ion batteries, and all other kinds of batteries are there. Now, when we looked at the possible options for in the context of Bangladesh, we thought that this pumped hydropower would be a very good choice for us, because we have this power plant, hydropower plant in Chowdhury, that could be actually used to extend some of these hydro-based peaking power plant. And another major choice that we readily thought that it would be feasible, might be feasible if finance allows, is battery-based systems for the grid. And we actually explored these two options. In fact, the student group actually explored both of these two options, and we'll show you their findings. And of course, we kept open what are the other things that we might do. And before I get to that findings, let me show you what others are doing right now, US, particularly US, EU, and some other countries. So grid storage wise, if in US, showing it's the figures are a little bit dated. It's from 2013. That's the latest that I could find. Pumped hydro is 94.5% of the total storage in the US. Another 5% is a mix of this flywheel, compressed air, thermal storage, and batteries. But from 2013, it must have changed a lot by now, because the battery portion is increasing over the time. And of course, it shows this particular graph shows how I mean what are the rated capacities of those storage projects. You know, if it's more than I mean, depending on what is your cutoff point, you can decide which is grid scale, which is not. It would certainly vary from country to country. Now, this one shows next one shows a much more detail about the technologies variations. And if you can see that lithium-ion batteries share is increasing lately. In 2015 and 2016, it's almost 100%. The new additions that are happening in the US. The same is true for other countries also. The next one shows the percent of the total capacity that are actually storage based. It is, but this figure is coming from the EU countries. If you notice, the Finland figure, they have 69% of their total capacity as their storage. Now, when you have this huge storage portion in your total capacity mix, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of managing the grid. And we see, and of course, it also indicates probably the share of renewable sources, because if you have a lot of renewable sources of energy, you have to store them to use them effectively and efficiently. Otherwise, they are not matched with your demand cycle, right? And that it kind of shows for the smaller nations in US, you will see that a relatively higher amount of storage, higher capacity in the storage segment. Few other numbers are there. It shows quite a few variation. Ireland has 36%. United Kingdom have 5.6%, whereas US, China, they are increasing. Their absolute numbers are very high, but it's not a very big portion of the total capacity. That's probably normal, given that they have this huge demand, huge capacities, right? But absolute numbers of the storage capacity is actually increasing globally everywhere, and most of them are actually lithium-ion based. Now that led us to question this: what we are going to do in Bangladesh? We do not have even at least in our search we could not find anything on the on-grid side, storage-based capacity. In Germany, on-grid side, it's 40%. Residential side, it's 58%. 750 megawatt is coming from the residential. In the US, the picture is not as balanced because they are coming late into this renewable game. But I think it will increase very sharply with this new administration, the Biden administration, and renewed focus on renewables. So that led us to our question that what are the options that Bangladesh have when it comes to this on-grid or storage-based power stations or for grid. So battery-based storage system is one of the choice. Pumped hydro storage system is others, and the third option that we kept open is to explore, to have some pilot projects or maybe open some national level R&D labs to see what can be feasible, what can be made feasible in the context of our situation. And of course, with the entrepreneurial ecosystem warming up, a lot of countries have this presence of startup companies who are pursuing this to fill this gap. So we don't have, yes.
I think we have to accelerate a little bit because we have also
time. Yes,
time.
Yes. I'll be short. We are pretty close to ending our conversation here. So that's our third option. Now, to compare the two basic to solid options that we have, that's the battery storage peaking power plant. And what is the cost? It's the cost that we found so far is 32 Dhaka lithium-ion based, 32, 33 almost Bangladeshi Dhaka per unit. And if you compare that with this water pump hydro that could be built in the Kaptai, in addition to what we already have. I'm not going into the details of this engineering project, but the prices is 12.47. It's less than 13 Taka. Now, if you compare these two choices, certainly pumped back hydro energy cost, this option looks feasible right now. And this particular number, the numbers were actually, I should mention that students are not here in this presentation, they're probably listening. Students, these two numbers came out of their senior project in United University. So it's pretty clear that if you look at the number, look at the comparison, we have the pumped hydro energy based peaking power plant. At least that's the suggestion that came out from this project so far. So to conclude or to discuss this, we found that pumped hydro scheme as feasible. Battery storage is not feasible. The numbers doesn't show it, but if you bring in those electric cars into the system, and if the houses have batteries already installed because of other reasons, for policy reasons or for their car charging reason, then this feasibility number will change, right? Of course, the other option, third option, is open to be explored. And with that, I think we would stop here, and here we have the names of our other collaborators who are not present in this session right now. Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'll stop here and will be open to answer questions later.
Thank you very much. As he has talked for quite some time, we don't have much time for question and answers, but still, just few quick questions can be accepted for the time being. After the presentations, if you've got more time, we can discuss more on this topic. Anybody having any question on this topic, please?
Professor Khan, we have 3 questions in the Q&A. Should I just read them out, or?
Yeah, please.
Okay. The first one is, dear Professor Salam, where's the potential of pumped hydro Bangladesh? First. Second, we have already nearly 10 million batteries distributed around the country. Out of this 10 million, nearly 4 million can be classified as behind the meter energy storage. Should I repeat?
No,
Yeah,
no, I got the question.
Sir, you can also see it, right? Yeah, you can also.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Shahid, go ahead.
Yeah, the location of the pumped hydro is in Kapta in Chittagong. We already have a hydro power plant there, and the proposal is that we can, if we can build a separate reservoir to use the solar system, solar powers to pump some of the waters back to the reservoir that can be used as the peaking power source, additional peaking power. The power station already is a peaking power source, so we will be basically increasing the capacity of that using additional solar sources. And to add to the second, to answer the second question, 10 million batteries, yes, that's the big question. Now, to bring those 10 million batteries or full 4 million batteries, as you mentioned, I don't know how you separate them, but we need policy support, or policies has to be there, right? You cannot just start feeding into we don't have a feed-in tariff yet at the national level. So that's why we did not consider them as a viable option. Tara, you want to add something to that?
No, that's fine.
Yes.
The next question comes from a former UAU student who is now a PhD student at Flensburg. It's from Mominul Hassan. He's asking about, instead of pumped hydro, can we explore compressed air energy storage? Because we will run out of gas soon, can we use those depleted gas mines as compressed air energy storage?
Yeah, those are technologically, those are possible. I mean, internationally, these different technologies are already installed. So we can certainly explore those either at the government public level, or if there are entrepreneurs who want to actually show that a certain technology is more feasible, more viable than the proposed ones. Certainly, these are valid options that should be pursued.
I have a feeling that is compressed air will be a little bit more expensive compared to the existing storage devices, because see, when you compress the air, your pump managed efficiency, I mean, when you compress, there's a change in temperature of the gas, and retaining all of them at the end, you will find that possibly they are more expensive compared to the existing storage devices.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And then we have a third question, also from here, from Mariam Isfahani. Thanks a lot, Mariam, for asking. Professor Alam, how well are lithium-iron batteries doing in Bangladesh? I think they are mostly lead acid batteries, correct?
Yes, that's the current scenario. And when we suggested the lithium-ion batteries, we are thinking about the exploration was for the grid scale installations that doesn't exist yet. So, of course, if we want to bring in those 10 million or 4 million batteries, which are mostly lead acid, we will be adding a good amount of capacity into the system. But that will happen only if we have a feed-in tariff, right? Otherwise, it would be probably difficult for the users to invest more into the system, but not get anything.
Just I would like to add one comment that although we have got from the solar home systems and power systems, we've got some large, as per the numbers, the number of the batteries are pretty large. But when you think of the real capacity of these batteries, I mean, they may not be really very significant. So for the grid scale, I mean, when you think of the peak loads and other things are concerned, possibly they will not be of much use to the grid. Of course, it may mitigate the situation, but I don't think it will be a really big figure that will come out of those 4 million batteries. Thank you.
Yes, I agree that, but I mean, we are assuming that things will stay like this. But if there is policies, would these capacities of these batteries change, like at the individual level? That can happen with the policy support, right, sir?
No, but thing is that you have already mentioned the cost. So if someone is trying to do it, then it must be cost effective. That's the first issue that comes up. So possibly they have installed those batteries just for the solar home systems or when the grid was not there. So when the grid comes, possibly these batteries will make their systems more expensive unless they find that their reliability of power is too poor. So they have to use the batteries anyway. But otherwise, cost-wise, I mean, it will not be cost effective.
Sebastian, you might have some ideas what might happen.
No, I would just say, see, a lot of people already consider it an investment worth making by having all the IPS systems in our, I mean, that's what Professor Khan just was alluding to. So where the people say, okay, look, I don't care about the cost, you know, I just want my Wi-Fi to always work. That's why I need an IPS system in my house. The question is, can those batteries, they're all independent, they're all one-way streets, as Muminul yesterday gave a presentation. Can those be leveraged? And can this become two-way streets? But for this, as you said, Shahid, we need policy change. And I think we could probably have a different session on why this policy is not changing. But I think it's overdue to give Shakila the floor probably. But so back to you, Professor Khan.
Yeah, I think our next presenter will be Shakila Aziz. So Shakila, please give a brief introduction of yourself and start the presentation right away.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, respected colleagues and audience. Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I am going to give two successive presentations. The first of them is on behalf of my co-author, who is Professor Sheikh Moshe Jahan from the Institute of Business Administration, the University of Dhaka. My first presentation is going to be the determinants of international development investments in renewable energy in emerging economies. So this research is related to my doctorate topic, but I'm presenting it in this conference. Now, to provide a brief background behind this research, you know that energy and renewable energy is mentioned in the target 7 of the SDG 7, the target 7A, and 7A says that by 2030, there should be more international cooperation to facilitate access to clean energy, research and technology, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, and advanced and cleaner fossil fuel technology, and promote investment in energy infrastructure and clean energy technology. So this SDG 7 target is to increase financing flows to basically developing countries to expand the scale and share of renewable energy and clean energy. And this can be measured by international financial flows to developing countries in support of clean energy research and development and renewable energy production, including in hybrid systems. So how well is the world doing with this particular target of SDG 7? In absolute terms, the financing flows has been increasing since the year
Shakila,
2000.
Yes. Can I interrupt? Are you presenting anything on us on the screen? You haven't shared your, have you any presentations?
Okay, right, yes. Sorry, let me share the screen, which. Okay, sir, can you see the screen now?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned, what the SDG 7A target and indicator was, and now I'm going to look at what has been the success of public financing in this area. Now, the financing has increased from the year 2000 to 2017 in absolute terms. So there has been more investment throughout the world steadily. However, this flow of money does not necessarily go to the most underprivileged or the most needed areas. Only 12% of public finance funds for the SDG 7 reached the least developed countries in 2017. This is according to the SDG data compilers, IEA, IRENA, and World Bank and World Health Organization, etc. So this is a heat map which shows where the international finance for clean energy went in 2016. 2017 is actually the latest year of data collection. We can see that most of the money is going to places like India, China, then Turkey, then Mexico, and some South Asian countries as well. However, these are not really the poorest countries or the most backward countries. Some of the most backward countries, which you can see in Africa, in the sub-Saharan African region, they actually receive relatively less amount of money. So this money, although it's going to developing countries, is not going according to the most need, but is rather going according to maybe business attractiveness or some financial considerations. Compared to that, compared to the flow of funds, we can see the per capita electricity consumption in 2019. We can see that those places which were marked yellow in the previous graph are marked white or light gray here. And these are the areas with the lowest per capita electricity consumption in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan and even Myanmar. And these places don't receive the larger share of investments. Now, one of the objectives of this research is to find out what are the policy and regulatory environment that can be created within a country to attract international aid and different types of financial flows. So this map provides an overview of the favorable regulatory climate in different countries. We can see that the green areas receive a high score. That means the regulatory policy framework to support renewable energy have a high score, say from 67 to 100. The medium score are the orange areas, and the low score are the red areas. So we can see that the places which first of all, don't have high levels of electricity consumption, and also don't have, they don't attract a lot of investment or foreign investment flows. These are also the places with very low scores on the regulatory climate in these countries, like in the African region and in the Central Asian and Pakistan and Afghanistan and Kazakhstan and Mongolia and so forth. So based on this background, we have also done a review of the literature of what has already been explored in terms of different types of financing going to developing countries. For example, Buntain and Pfizer, they found out that donor financing in renewable energy projects, it does not necessarily increase private sector investments if the financing goes to invest in particular generation projects. But if the financing was employed for catalyzing policy reform, this would then in turn increase the share of private sector investments, which is actually necessary to scale up investments in renewable energy. Then Lee et al., they have found out that green official development aid is more effective in mitigating emission in countries with more economic freedom and low corruption, but it is less effective in mitigating carbon emissions in countries which have poor institutional frameworks. Lopez et al. Have found out that a strong domestic regulatory framework and capacity building, deregulation and liberalization have been successful to bringing official development assistance to African countries for the different SDGs, including SDG 7, which we are focusing on right now. Mamoun in 2016 has found a contrary type of result, where aid or development financing channeled to countries with worsening government ability and poor law and order and low bureaucratic quality. And the attention to democracy and governance factors vary among donor countries. She found out that Canada pays attention to the democratic framework and strength of law and order in the recipient countries, whereas France pays no attention to these things. And sometimes the donor countries actually want to invest in countries which have a sort of authoritarian government, because this somehow provides a guarantee or an insurance for their financial investment. Pfeiffer and Mulder have found out that economic and regulatory instruments and higher per capita income and education, stable democratic regimes, these increase renewables in developing countries. And if there is increasing openness and aid, institutional and strategic policy supports and high fossil fuel production, these decrease the share of renewables. Ragosa and Warren have found that regulatory instruments, international public finance, feed-in tariffs, political stability, higher gross domestic product, and electricity consumption, these factors attract cross-border private investments in developing countries. Ang, Rogers, and Burley, they have found out that the public tender instruments, carbon pricing, ease of doing business, electricity generation, and natural endowment, these increase investments in developing countries through foreign asset finance and domestic finance as well. And also corporate debt, venture capital, and private equity. And Kim has found out that regulatory instruments like obligation schemes, and they mobilize foreign investment, upfront cost recovery through grants and subsidies, mobilize domestic investment. And multilateral support, CDM, demonstration projects, regulatory quality, and economic freedom have a positive effect, but feed-in tariff can be negative for domestic investments in developing countries. Lastly, Wall et al. Have found out that in non-OECD countries, FIT, that's feed-in tariffs, financial measures, emission trading scheme, interest rate, energy import, competitiveness, and financing support and CO2 emissions, these decrease green FDI in non-OECD countries. Now, based on our literature review, we have identified the research question of what are the drivers of international development investments in the renewable energy sector in developing countries. First, I would like to explain what comes under international development investments. Some of it can be in the form of aid or grants. Some of this can be in the form of concessional loans or loans. Some of them can be insurance products, loan guarantees, different types of financial instruments. And the investors can be development partners like World Bank and IMF, but they can also be venture capitalists, and they can be private equity. Different sources of investment come here as well. So it is a composite amount of investments. And to find out this, we have taken a sample of 87 developing countries. These countries are classified as upper middle income, lower middle income, and low income groups according to the World Bank classification system. And the time period taken is 2010 to 2017. The dependent variable we're going to use an econometric estimation. Here, our dependent variable is annual international development investments in millions of US dollars. And we have two categories of explanatory variables. One of them includes the policy and regulatory variables, and some of them are control variables. So here we have a number of policy variables. These include total number of active targets. This is a count measure. Then renewable energy in the NDC framework of the country. For example, Bangladesh mentions renewable energy in the NDC. Then whether the country has a feed-in tariff system, whether it has net metering, then biofuel blend mandates, renewable heat obligations, credible renewable energy certificates, then tendering or auctions, investment or production tax credit, reduction in sales energy and carbon dioxide tax, energy production payments, and public investments like loans and grants. These are binary variables. Then there are some other regulatory environments. These include political stability, regulatory quality, and rule of law. These are measured on a scale of -2.5, which is the worst, to +2.5. It's based on an index. And RISE regulatory renewable energy score. This can have a score from between 0 and 100. The higher scores mean there is a better regulatory environment in that country. Now we have used control variables. These include oil rents as a percentage of GDP in a country. Then the energy imports as a share of the GDP per capita. GDP per capita of the country in constant 2010 US dollars. The share of fossil fuels in electricity generation, and per capita electricity consumption. These are control variables. As the analytical model, we have used panel regression analysis, corrected standard errors, otherwise called PCS, and Driscoll-Cray standard error models. This is indicated from the literature and also according to our diagnostic tests, which we're going to look at right now. This is the summary statistics or descriptive statistics. We can see that our sample countries, the highest fossil fuel share is 55%. That means 45% is renewables, and oil rents can reach up to 55% of GDP of a country. Now here we are looking at the diagnostic tests. We have done the collinearity test, which is the variance inflation factor, VIF. Here, the highest VIF is 4.43. Now, any VIF which reaches 10 and above is considered to show high multicollinearity. So our VIF values are much lower than that. The mean VIF is 2.01. Now, in order to test if fixed effects or random effects are suitable, we found out that fixed effects test shows us, the F test shows us significance, and ultimately, the Houseman test gives a significant thing. Then the Pesaran cross-sectional dependence test is also significant. This means that there is cross-sectional dependence, and the data is also heteroscedastic. So basically, these diagnostic tests indicate the type of model that we have decided to use, the panel character standard errors and the Driscoll-Cray standard errors. These things will control or correct for the bias which arises. Bias are like heteroscedasticity, cross-sectional correlation, and so forth. Now we're moving on to the results, and I have placed the Driscoll-Cray model and the panel character standards side by side. So from this, we can find out that political stability is actually a significant and negative relationship with attracting for international investments. Now this is counterintuitive, but it actually corroborates the findings of Mamun, which we have mentioned in the literature previously. And however, the RISE RE score, this RE score is the favorable regulatory environment only for renewable energy investments. So this, according to the PCSC estimation, has a highly significant value. That means the regulatory environment for renewable energy in a particular country supports, or rather attracts, the international development investments. Oil rents don't seem to have significant effect in our model. However, regulatory quality in the Driscoll-Frame model has a slightly significant negative impact. Energy imports as GDP per capita has a highly significant and very large coefficient. This means that if a country has a high degree of energy dependence, that means that they are importing a lot of their energy from foreign countries as a share of their GDP per capita. So they are more likely to attract the international development investments in renewable energy. Also, GDP per capita itself has a significant value, although with a smaller coefficient. That means countries which are relatively wealthier among the developing countries tend to attract more of these international investments. Now, to mention, the investment is not only aid, but different kinds of investments. Now, per capita electricity consumption has a negative relationship. That means if a country has higher levels of electricity consumption, they may attract actually lower levels of investments. Fossil fuel share in renewable energy mix does not seem to have a significant effect. As for the particular or specific policy instruments used in a country, the total number of active targets does not have a relationship. It actually has a negative relationship. And whether a country has mentioned renewable energy in its NDC or not is not an important consideration for attracting investments. However, the presence of feed-in tariffs in a country, this has a high coefficient and highly significant value as well. Net metering, biofuel mandates, and renewable heat obligations, these don't seem to have a significant impact on foreign investment or international investments. Tradable renewable energy certificates and tendering, these attract investments from international sources. However, investment or production tax credits have a negative and slightly significant effect. And of course, the instrument of public investment loans and grants, these obviously have a high amount of a high level of significance and a high coefficient, because a country which uses public investment, it is often seen that the international investments are channeled through government government regulatory bodies or government financing bodies. So they are the ones who are able to attract the public investment loans and grants. So these are the results of our main model. And we are going to develop this research further by finding out if there are any differences in the determinants of international investments through grants versus loans. In this model, both grants and loans are included. Yes.
Can I interrupt a little bit? I mean, we are running out of time, so
yes.
we have to.
So this is actually my last slide. Thank you very much. And now I would welcome questions.
Thank you very much, Shakila, for your presentation. So anybody having questions on this, on the presentation?
Maybe just one short one if the time allows. Shakila, in your introduction, you said that actually the majority of the money goes to the relatively richer countries.
Yes.
Only 12% actually go to the lower countries. But now your regression results indicate that electricity consumption, the higher the electricity consumption, the more funding you get. But usually a higher electricity consumption is also goes hand in hand with richer countries. Is there a contradiction, or am I missing something?
Can you see my slide, please?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, per capita electricity consumption has a negative.
Oh, it's a negative coefficient. So
Yeah.
the lower your consumption, then it's fine. Then my bad. I didn't see the that of course changes everything. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Well, I would welcome more questions, because I'm going to develop this research further. So if you have any ideas how we can enrich the findings or enrich the research, that would be wonderful.
I mean, do you want your email to be circulated to the audiences? So if they want to contact you later, would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Sebastian.
I'll do that.
Yeah,
I'll do
please.
that. Yes.
So circulate her email. So if anyone's interested in further discussions or suggestions, I mean, it will be real good thing. So if there's no more question, I will move to the third presentation. Actually, the presentation is supposed to be given by Shahryar Ahmed Chowdhury, but as he's tied up otherwise, he's a very busy person. So I understand that he has a very important meeting today with the ministry. So Shakil Aziz will be making the last presentation in favor of Shahryar Ahmed Chowdhury. Please, Shakil, go on.
Thank you. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, it's there.
Okay. So this is our second presentation for this session. On behalf of my colleague Shahryar Chowdhury, I welcome you to our research on the efficiency and subsidy analysis of thermal power plants in Bangladesh. You know that the electricity sector in Bangladesh receives large quantities of subsidies, and the amount of these subsidies depends a lot on the function of the plant. That means whether they are base load or peaking, and also the type of fuel used. The tariff rate or the bulk tariff rate in Bangladesh is around 4.86 taka per unit, whereas the cost of production can vary between say for gas, it will be 3 point something to 18 in the case of some liquid fuels. So these things affect the amount of loss or profitability in a particular power plant and the consequent subsidies which have to be allocated to that type of power plant. So here we are going to explore an opportunity to replace some of the least efficient fuels and technologies with renewables. In order to do that, we have to do a comparative efficiency and performance analysis of all the power plants in Bangladesh to find out which ones are the best performers and which ones are the worst performers. And we're going to use a technique called data envelopment analysis, abbreviated to DEA, to do our analysis. Now, this is the trend of operating loss of the power sector in Bangladesh. It has quite high amounts, and the results are in 10 million BDT. And it keeps, there is no steady state of decreasing. The red line shows the absolute amount of loss, and the yellow line shows the loss as a percentage of revenue. And this is also the trend of the subsidies. The amount of subsidies for the electricity sector in 2012 was actually the highest, but even now it is quite high, and it's one of the highest things. And this is like the direct subsidies. There can be indirect subsidies through the fuel subsidization, which is used as a raw material for the plants as well. Now, to find out how these subsidies and losses are distributed at the level of individual power plants, we have first done a tabulation of power plant characteristics and how many are loss-making and what is the range of loss and amount of loss. We have identified 67 public and 83 private power plants, but among public power plants, 24 are loss-making and 58 private power plants are loss-making. So the total amount of loss of the public sector loss-making power plants is 26.7 billion Bangladeshi taka, whereas in the public sector, it is 102 billion. And the range in public sector power plant of loss is 1.45 to 751. And in the private can range from 0.04 to 962. So there is a high range of loss. And similar figures can be seen for base load and peak load as well. So not every plant has a high range of loss, and actually the loss is not evenly distributed. These high numbers, the 751 or 962, these are some outliers. So basically, a handful of plants are accounting for the most of the loss. And we can see that public plants, among the peak load plants, 27 are public and the rest are private sectors count for a greater share of loss among the power plants. If we do the same type of tabulation for fuel-wise plants, we can see that the highest amounts of loss comes in the HSD, or these are the high-speed diesel using power plants. The natural gas power plants have a lower range of loss. The HFO-based plants also have a loss, but the range is smaller than for the HSD. So here we can see the impact of fuel choice on the amount of loss of power plants. Based on this initial exploration, we have decided that we're going to prepare a comparative performance efficiency analysis of the plants categorized by base load and peaking. And then we're going to use a Tobit regression analysis to find out what are the drivers of performance of the plants. And these are going to be the uncontrollable variables. In the first part, we're going to use controllable variables. We're using two methods in our methodology. The first method is data envelopment analysis, and the second one is Tobit regression analysis. Now, to give a brief description, the DEA method was originally developed Charnes, Cooper, and Rhodes, and it's a non-parametric method which compares the relative efficiencies of a set of decision-making units or DMUs. In our case, the DMU, one DMU is one power plant. And this type of model assumes that there is a constant return to scale. This DEA was further developed by Banker, Charnes, and Cooper, and this is called the Bcc model. This model incorporates variable returns to scale, where there can be increasing returns to scale or decreasing returns to scale. This is the frontier of our model, the DEA model. If you just look at the white graph, you can see that the OBN line, this represents the constant returns to scale, whereas the PQCRS, this line refers to the variable returns to scale. In this variable returns to scale, the DMUs are P, Q, C, R, S, and D. Those DMUs which are on the frontier line, P, Q, C, R, S, those are efficient DMUs. Whereas DMU D, that one is an inefficient one because it falls inside the line. This is basically the essence. And here we have portrayed the model, the formula of the model, but I don't want to go into great details of this. I just want to mention that this is a linear programming type of model where the efficiency is maximized through maximizing the output by minimizing the input. There can be two types of orientation. There can be input orientation where the output is fixed and the input is minimized. And there can be output orientation where the input is fixed and the output is maximized. So in our analysis of power plants, we're actually going to use the input oriented model because we consider that the output of generation is sort of given according to the market demand in a particular situation. The idea is to minimize the costs and fuel consumption and so forth. As we mentioned before, the CCR model shows the constant returns to scale and the BCC model shows the variable return to scale. And after that, we're going to use a Tobit analysis. Here, the plant factors of the plants are regressed against uncontrollable variables like the function, the location in the country, the age, fuel type, and ownership. And Tobit regression is appropriate where the dependent variable has an upper and lower limit. So in this regression, the plant factor is the dependent variable, and the plant factor can have a value between 0 and 1. So because the upper and lower bounds are censored, this type of regression is appropriate for that situation. although there are around 150 power plants, because of data accuracy considerations, and some plants are new and don't have complete data, we are taking in our sample 91 peaking power plants and 30 baseload power plants, and we're taking the latest published year of performance, that's the 2019-2020 performance. Before that, we have to do some diagnostics, and here in our model, we have 4 types of input variables: fuel cost, variable operating and maintenance, fixed cost, these are, and the install capacity, these are the input variables, and the output one is annual generation. This is measured in gigawatt hours. And in order for the DEA model to be valid, one of the requirements is that it should be isotonic. That means all the variables should have a positive correlation. So we've done the correlation matrix, and we can see that all the variables have a positive correlation. So our analysis is going to be valid as far as correlation is concerned. Now, moving on to the results, we have found out the DEA scores of 30 baseload plants and 91 peaking plants, but we cannot show all the scores because that would take up a lot of space, and it's not meaningful to look at each and every one at the for the time being. So we've done a frequency distribution. This is for the baseload plants. Now, 1 is the maximum efficiency and 0 is the minimum efficiency. We can see that most of the baseload plants are relatively efficient, and actually a majority of them have an efficiency score of 1. That means they're highly efficient, and the lowest efficiency is 6 point something. That means very few plants have low efficiency, and most of them have high efficiency. This is in the case of baseload plants. However, the picture changes if we look at the peaking power plants. Here, although there are a number of efficient plants with a score of 1, we can see that there is also a large number of inefficient plants with a score of between 3 and 5, like 0.3 and 0.5. And there are some extremely inefficient plants with a score of 0.2, a small number of them. So here, the distribution is actually widespread, and this indicates to us that these plants having very low efficiency, these can be candidates for eventual replacement, possibly with renewable energy and cleaner sources and newer technologies. So now that we know what is the efficiency distribution of the different types of plants, we're moving on to the second stage of our analysis, and this is the Tobit regression analysis. That what are the factors which actually account for these efficiencies? We've done the statistical analysis for that. We have found out that age actually has a positive and small impact on plant efficiency. You would think that latest plants would be more efficient and older plants would be less efficient. Some of our oldest plants in the sample are more than 30 years old, but actually this is not the case here because the older plants are gas-based, and gas-based ones have lower cost, and they are usually baseload plants, so they end up being more efficient. And the more recent additions to the generation fleet, they are based on liquid fuels, which are less efficient. Now, controlling for other things, we can see that the base load and peak load, this is not really a factor that influences efficiency if you consider other factors like location and ownership and age and fuel sources. Now, we have found out interestingly that plants in the Mymensingh area have better efficiency, although we have to look into the reasons for that. Plants using combined cycle technology, they have a higher level of efficiency, and other technologies have a lower level of efficiency. Public plants seem to have a lower level of efficiency when controlling for other things. Now, moving on to the fuel analysis, our reference fuel is gas. So we can see that the fuel oil, or HFO, dummy variable shows a negative and highly significant coefficient. This means that fuel oil using plants have a negative impact on efficiency, and the same is for the HSD ones as well. These are the findings from our Tobit regression. So we can summarize this by saying that controlling for fuel type and ownership, peaking power plants are not necessarily worse than baseload ones because they have a different type of function. It's in fact the fuel type, which includes liquid fuels, which adversely affects performance. And older plants are gas-based and therefore they're more efficient. So we're going to develop our research further by doing a performance efficiency analysis of these power plants, including their environmental impact and job creation. Because power generation and cost and subsidies is not the only criteria of evaluating power plants. The thermal power plants also, and the choice of fuel also determines their environmental impact. Like coal plants have a worse impact per unit of generation compared to gas plants. So we're going to try to include that in the follow-up part of the research. And we're also going to look at job creation because if a power plant is retired or replaced, it has to also take into account job creation. This is especially true for the public sector, but it's also important for the private sector. So with this, I'd like to conclude my second presentation, and I would welcome any questions or queries about our research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shakira, for the presentation. Now the floor is open for question and answer. Sebastian, do you have any questions?
Well, I mean, I couldn't help but see that outlier, and I was wondering whether it's just an outlier with this 962 Dhaka per kilowatt in the in that slide. Is this just an accident, or do you have a little bit of a backstory here?
Okay, so we're going to put these in our detailed analysis. Actually, like I said, maybe 10 power plants are outliers in each group. Okay, and they're outliers because they operate in only a certain time of the year or in certain hours. Mm-hmm. That's really the
so it's a lot of fixed cost, and that's how you get a tariff of
some of these strange figures are mentioned in the PowerCell websites. I mean, you can, if you go to the PowerCell website, you can see that some of the peaking power plants have gotten per kilowatt hour cost of something like $8 to $10. I've seen that. So possibly they run only for a particular season, not even every day.
We have found out that there is one power plant which operates during Ramadan after Iftar, when there is a high demand for electricity. So there are some exceptional cases. So these are some outliers.
Yeah. I think, sorry, please.
Yeah, please go on.
No, just maybe one, I think, and we had this in the policy discussion on the first day of the conference, where Professor Tamim from BUET was asked, what are the subsidy schemes for renewables? And the answer was basically there are none. And then what are the subsidies for oil and gas? And he answered $1 billion per year. So I think it would be interesting to see a little bit, that is obviously quite black and white. But if you have this trend for subsidies, to compare a little bit, because whatever I hear here is always solar is expensive. But when I hear that one sector is subsidized with $1 billion per year and the other not, then I guess that puts things a little bit in perspective.
Yes, thank you. This is what we are looking into, considering especially these outlier sectors. And we have also found out that out of 3 major coal power plants who are actually subsidized, their cost of fuel is higher than the tariff rate. So coal is not necessarily cheap. It's just cheaper than fuel oil or diesel or something. And we have also found out that the import from India, the rate of the cost of import is higher than the local tariff rate. So this also indicates subsidies for the import sector as well.
Hi, thank you very much, Shakila. Professor Rezwan, over to you again. Professor Rezwan, are you still with us?
No,
Sometimes Zoom temporarily disconnects.
yeah, I'm afraid his connection is gone.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't see him.
Okay, then Professor Shahid, maybe you can chime in here, because I see quite a little bit of relationship between your research and the research just presented. I think it was actually yours gave a very good introduction why the things moved the way they are, and Shakila then gave a lot of numbers on the individual power plants, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, the analysis that we have seen from the third paper is interesting, but what I would be probably more interested about is what is keeping those lower cost, lower efficiency plants in operation. You have some in 0.2, 0.3, in the range of 0.2, 0.3 efficiency, right? Could you go into that slide where it shows the efficiencies? Yes, this one. Now, if you were suggesting that these would be some of the candidates that should be considered to be replaced with solar or renewable sources, right? Now, I would argue that even without the solar, even without the renewable sources, why are those still in operation, 0.2 and 0.3 and 0.4? This can be replaced with those other ones, 0.9 and 0.8. Is there a reason? Did you find something that could be technical in nature, or then that might be related to some regulations?
Yes, we have done that in the second stage of our analysis in the Tobit regression. We found that fuel cost determines the low efficiency. You can see in the lower, the F oil, this is the fuel oil dummy variable. This has a negative effect on efficiency, and it is highly significant. So this is actually a significant finding, that those peaking power plants which have low efficiency, they run on high cost fuels. This is one major thing which is impacting their lower efficiency. And this efficiency is based on the amount of electricity generation which is produced based on the costs and the installed capacity, which was described in the variable description.
So this lower efficiency is coming specifically from the extra overhead that we have for peaking power plant.
It's coming from the fuel costs.
Type of fuel?
Can I ask a question here?
Yes, sir. You can take over. Yes.
See, my internet there's a problem. I was trying to answer that question. Usually, you see, efficiency is not doesn't have a direct relationship with the type of fuel. Because I know the IPPs who run on furnace oil, they have an average higher efficiency than the overall PDB efficiency. Are these power stations, are power development board, the public sector power stations of the peaking power plant, or they include private public both? Because
okay, these power plants include both private and public, and we can see that. Yeah, okay. The public one has a negative and significant coefficient, the public dummy variable. It has a negative coefficient.
I can give an explanation. Usually what happens, when the engine becomes less efficient, they keep it only they never keep it in the base load, because if you run more, you lose more. So when the efficiency goes down, they use them only during the peak loads. And these are all public sector peaking power plants. So it may not be a true picture if you just present it this way. Because what this is, they were efficient engines, but in course of time they can become less efficient. So what the public power producers have done, they have restricted its operation just to reduce their loss. So I think you have to look into that aspect as well.
Yes, that's what we will do.
Does that mean that if retiring them is even costlier?
I couldn't follow you, Shahid.
I mean, yes, if they're inefficient, it makes sense to reduce loss, to have them as peaking power plant. I was wondering whether retiring these plants is an option.
No, Shahid, you have to try to look at the economics as well. You see,
Yes, that's what I'm.
overhead cost dominates. Overhead cost dominates. So if the lower efficiency means the fuel cost goes up, but fuel cost is an insignificant part of the total cost of production in case of a picking power plant. So what these people do, even if the machine is less efficient, they still run it so long they find that it can run effectively for the picking power plants, because picking power plant, rate is much higher. So it doesn't really mean that they're running it at a loss. They're running it at a lower efficiency, but they may not be running at a loss. And if they do not run at a loss, possibly, the power companies will not replace them that easily.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. If it's still financially feasible for that picking hour, then it can continue. Thank you.
Any other questions, Sebastian?
No, I'm good. I would have loved to have a little bit more of a policy discussion why we don't have a feed in, but I'm afraid we'll have to postpone that discussion because we're at the end of our time. So thank you very much, Professor Rezwan Khan, for chairing this session. Thank you very much, Professor Shahid, for your contribution, as well as for your double effort, Shakila, for 2 papers. I hope you got some, I'm sure you got some good feedback, at least on the second paper. Hopefully you'll also get some more on your first paper. And they will also go into the review process here after that conference, and there will probably be even more feedback then. So thank you very much.
May I ask when the full papers are due?
Yes, it's on the website. I think it was April 30. Okay. The full papers are due, but Lucas, okay, you can correct me in the background here, who moderates that process. But it's on the website, and if I recall correctly, it's April 30. The full papers are due. But we will be contacting everybody, every author, panelist who has presented research here, so that this definitely doesn't get forgotten. So thank you very much, everyone. We're going into a break now at the conference, and we'll be back at 5 p.m. in half an hour Dhaka time, with 2 sessions, one on electricity distribution and one on water and energy, where we have another set of excellent papers. Thanks a lot again, and talk to you all soon.